Today's objective is I will be able to increase and decrease by a given percentage using a multiplier. So before we start today's lesson, I'd like you to do this quick warm up for me. Press pause and then we'll go through it. Okay, so I'm going to use the calculator method here. So to find 10% of 300, I'm going to times it by 0.10 or 0.10, which is 30. I'm going to increase by 30, so 300 add 30 is 330. Question 2, decrease by 15%. So I'm going to find 15% by doing 200 times 0.15, which is 30. Decrease means make it smaller, so 200 minus 30 is 170. Question 3, increase by 21%. So to find 21% of 500, I times by 0.21, which is 105. So to increase, I need to make it bigger. Add it on, gives me 605. Okay, if you're unsure on how to find a percentage of an amount and to increase or decrease, revise it before moving on to today's lesson. Okay, our key points for today are: you can calculate a percentage increase or decrease in one go by using a multiplier. Okay, so I'm going to do a worked example with you. I'm going to show you the steps first. So what we do is we always start with 100. Start with 100%. Okay, now we start with 100% because that represents the whole amount. If I am increasing by a percentage, I add the percentage on, and then I simply divide by 100, and that will get me a decimal to multiply by. Okay, so what I mean by that is if we want to increase by 15%, I start with 100%, so here's my 100%. I add on the percentage, so I'm increasing by 15%, so I add on 15%. That gives me 115. I then divide by 100 to get the decimal. So 115 divided by 100 is 1.15. So if I want to increase something in one go by 15%, I simply would multiply it by 1.15. Okay, I'm going to do another quick one here. This time it's a decimal, so I want to increase by 2.3%, but it follows the same rules. So I start with 100%, I add on my percentage, which is 2.3%, that gives me 102.3, and then I divide it by 100 to get the decimal. Divide that by 100, 2 jumps to the left, or you can use your calculator. I get 1.023. So to increase by 2.3% in one go, I simply times by 1.023. So these are our multipliers for increasing. So it's important that we understand what a multiplier is and how to find it, because this makes it quicker and easier on a calculator paper. So when we're dealing with awkward percentages or awkward numbers, it means we can do it in one go. And remember, 2 of your papers are calculator. So here's one for you to do. Follow your steps here. Press pause, have a go, and then we will go through it. Okay then, so you start with 100%, you add on the 7%, which gives you 107, divide it by 100 to get your decimal, which gives me 1.07. So your multiplier is 1.07. Okay, now I've got 4 quick questions for you to do. Press pause, have a go, and then we'll go through them. Okay, so we start with 100, we add on 2, gives me 102, divide by 100, gives me 1.02. Increase by 72%, 100 add 72 is 172, divide that by 100, gives me 1.72. Question 3, increase by 37.5. So 100 at 37.5 is 137.5. Divided by 100 gives me 1.375. This one here, 100 at 1.5 is 101.5. Divided by 100 gives me 1.015. So that is how to find a multiplier for increasing. So moving on then, we're going to look at the multipliers for decreasing. Here we go. You might have an idea of how this might work. So let's start by writing our steps. So same as before. Okay, you're going to start with 100%. Okay, now because it is a decrease, we're now going to subtract our percentage. Okay, and then the final step is to divide by 100 to get the decimal. So it follows the same idea, but because it's a decrease, you're going to subtract instead of add. So if I'm doing this question here, I'm going to start with 100. I'm going to minus 15, which is 85, and then I divide it by 100 to get my decimal. So I get 0.85. So my multiplier to decrease by 15% is 0.85. Okay, second example here is a decimal, that's fine. So we start with 100, we minus the 2.3, which leaves with 97.7. And then we make it a decimal by dividing by 100. So I get 0.977. Okay, have a little look at that, take it in, and then I've got one for you to do here. Okay then, see how you did. So you start with 100, you're decreasing, so you minus the 7, gives you 93. Divide by 100 to get the decimal, 0.93. So we would multiply by 0.93 to get a decrease of 7%. So I have 4 quick questions for you to do. Press pause, have a go, and then we will go through them. Okay then, so 100 minus 2 is 98. Divided by 100 gives you 0.98. Question 2, decrease by 72%. So start with 100 and minus 72, which leaves me with 28. Divide it by 100 to get the decimal. I get 0.28. Question 3, decrease of 37.5. So 100 minus 37.5 gives you 62.5. Divided by 100 gives me 0.625. And the last one here, decreasing by 1.5%. So 100 minus 1.5 is 98.5. Divided by 100 to get your decimal leaves you with 0.985. Okay, just something for you to be aware of. If you are using your Casio calculator, here we go, here's mine. If you do this, 100 minus 1.5, it gives your answers as fractions. If you are getting that and you are unaware how to change them to decimals, you press this S to D button here. That changes it to a decimal. I need to divide by 100. Okay. It does give most of your answers as fractions, but we just press this S to D button and you get your answer as a decimal. So if that was happening to you, hopefully you either knew or you now know how to get your answer as a decimal. Okay, so what I've got for you here then is a little table, and it's got some questions on both. So I would like the multiplier to increase by 18% and the multiplier to decrease by 18%. So press pause, have a go, and then we'll come back and mark them. Okay, so here are your answers. Okay, all the workings out there, so have a little look, mark what you've done. Hopefully you've got them all correct. Okay, so here's an example of how we actually use these multipliers. So this wants me to increase £490 by 11%. So the first thing we do is find a percentage multiplier in the way that we have been doing. So start with 100. I'm increasing, so I'm going to add on the 11%. That gives me 111, and then I'm going to divide that by 100 to get my multiplier. So to increase by 11%, I simply multiply the amount by 1.11. So I go 490 times 1.11, and I will get my answer in one go. 490 times 1.11 equals, and remember what I said before, you press your S to D button and it gives me the answer as 543.9. Now, two things to be aware of here is I was dealing in money, so I do need to put a pound sign in my answer. You can lose a mark if you do not do that in the exam. And also, money is always to 2 decimal places, so I pop a 0 on the end. So my actual answer is £543.90. Okay, so I have one for you to try here. Press pause and have a go. Okay, so the first thing you're going to do is work out your multiplier. So I start with 100, it's an increase, so I'm going to add on the 17%, so I get 117. Now I need to make that into a decimal by dividing by 100, gives me 1.17. So I need to do 270 times 1.17. So when I type that in, I get 315.9. So don't forget your pound sign. And remember, money is always to 2 decimal places. So my answer is £315.90. Okay, so what I need you to do now then, please, is complete the worksheet that is attached, complete your exit ticket that is also attached, and send copies to your teacher for you to mark.